I knew the factory tour was wrong when the man showing me around locked the production floor from the inside. It was March of 2016, outside Lowell, Massachusetts. I checked properties for a group that converted old industrial buildings into storage units. The plant sat beside a branch of the Merrimack behind a closed tire shop. Half the windows were boarded. The brick sign over the loading bay still said Mercer Cloth. The owner's representative was a guy named Colin, mid-40s, tan work jacket, clean boots. He met me beside a dented Chevy Tahoe and handed me a yellow hard hat. "Power's mostly off," he said. "Watch the floors." It was cold enough to see my breath. The first building had empty offices, warped doors, and old calendars on corkboard. Coffee cups sat beside a sink. The place smelled like wet plaster and machine oil. Colin knew the square footage and had keys for everything. Honestly, I liked him at first. He pointed out the bad roof and asbestos tiles without trying to sell me on the place. The main weaving floor was across a covered bridge, with rows of old looms under high windows. Dust covered most of them, but the center aisle was clean. Not polished. Just used. "Maintenance crew," Colin said when I asked. "Insurance wants monthly checks." That made sense. Old mills have pumps and pipes that freeze. I wrote it down. At the far end, I heard a metal knock behind a plywood wall. It came once, then again. Colin didn't react. "Raccoons?" I asked. "Loose vent, probably." The wall looked temporary. Fresh screws, cheap plywood, and an empty fire extinguisher cabinet mounted across one seam. I stepped closer. The air there was warmer. I smelled cooked rice, mixed with sweat and detergent. Colin called from the aisle. "Nothing back there. Old utility space." Warm air moved through the seam. Then someone whispered, "Please." Very quiet. Close enough that I heard the lips catch on the word. I turned around. Colin was watching me. His face had gone flat. "Open it," I said. "You misheard something." A harder knock hit the plywood. Several voices started at once. I couldn't make out the words, but they were people. I grabbed the extinguisher cabinet and pulled. It swung outward on hidden hinges. Behind it was a narrow passage lit by bare bulbs. Extension cords ran along the floor. Bins of fabric scraps and boxes with the labels cut off lined the passage. At the end was a room between two storage walls. There were people inside, maybe 15, all adults. They sat on mattresses or folding chairs beside two sewing tables. Rolls of dark fabric were stacked against the wall. A woman named Anna, I learned later, came toward me with both hands raised. "Door?" she said. "He locks door?" Colin hit me from behind before I could answer. Something hard clipped my shoulder and the side of my head. I went into the wall and dropped my clipboard. For a few seconds, I heard only a high whine. Colin dragged the hidden door shut. The passage lights went out. Then the big floor lights came on through gaps above the wall. I heard bolts slide. "Stay where you are," Colin called through the plywood. A man named Luis pulled me away from the door. He spoke fast, mostly Spanish. Mine was bad, but I understood enough. Colin had brought other visitors before. One had found the room. Luis pointed at the floor and made a cutting motion across his throat. I didn't ask for details. The old looms started. One motor coughed to life, then another. Belts slapped overhead. Metal frames struck in a hard rhythm that filled the walls and floor. Dust shook from the ceiling. The noise was so strong I felt it in my teeth. People pounded on the plywood, but nobody outside would have heard them. I could barely hear the person beside me. Anna pulled me toward the back corner. A service hatch near the ceiling had been covered with steel mesh. A man named Raj was working at the bolts with a spoon sharpened against concrete. I checked my phone. No signal. The room had one real door, steel, leading deeper into the mill. It was locked. I tried the hinges and frame. Nothing moved. Beside it was a black smear on the concrete. The loom noise stopped for half a second. In that gap, we heard someone scream. The machines slammed back to life. Nobody looked surprised. Colin opened the steel door 5 minutes later. His jacket was off. He held a long industrial fabric knife with a straight blade. One shirt cuff was dark. He pointed at me. "You, come here." No one moved. Colin grabbed Luis by the collar. Luis fought him. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Colin drove the knife into his side once, quick and low, then let him fall. The room rushed him. Colin backed through the door, swinging the blade in shortcuts. Everyone pulled away. He tried to slam it, but I got my boot into the gap. Anna and Raj shoved with me. The opening was barely wide enough for my shoulder. Colin cut at my face. The blade caught the rim of the hard hat and knocked it off. I pushed through, hit him with both hands, and ran. The door led into a maintenance corridor behind the weaving floor. Pipes lined the ceiling. The concrete was slick with condensation. Colin came after me, breathing hard. I knew the basic layout from the tour. Boiler room left, stairs to the control booth right. I went right. Through wired glass, I saw belts moving and shuttles snapping back and forth. Some machines had no guards. Colin knew every blind corner in that place. I didn't. At the stairs, he caught my coat and pulled me backward. I slipped out of one sleeve, turned, and kicked his knee. He hit the rail, but kept the knife. I reached the control booth and slammed the door. The lock was broken. An old panel covered one wall. Loom banks, floor lights, exhaust, roof vents. Most tags were faded, but the emergency smoke system had been replaced recently. Bright red handle. Printed instructions. Colin hit the door. The glass cracked around the latch. I pulled the smoke handle. Sirens started as dampers opened in the ceiling. Motors rumbled above us. The upper windows began to swing outward. Cold daylight poured through the dust. Colin broke the glass and reached inside for the knob. I threw the roof vent switch too. Below us, metal doors released with heavy clanks. People climbed out of the hidden area. I saw Anna first, pulling herself onto a loom frame. Raj followed. Others came through old fire exits hidden behind pallets. They moved toward the exterior ladders under the open windows. Colin saw them. He forgot me. He ran onto the weaving floor and grabbed Anna by her sweatshirt. Raj hit him with a wooden shuttle. Colin stumbled into the narrow space between two working looms. His jacket was tied around his waist. One sleeve hung loose. It caught in a belt. Colin dropped the knife and grabbed the fabric, but the belt pulled faster than he could untie it. He was dragged sideways against the machine frame. Raj reached for the stop lever. Colin kicked at him, and the jacket twisted tighter. The loom pulled him in. I shut off the main bank from the booth. By the time the machines slowed, Colin wasn't moving. Fire crews came through the loading bay less than 10 minutes later. State police arrived after them. Luis needed surgery, but he lived. The search took 2 days. Police found locked sleeping rooms, payroll sheets with first names only, and finished garments boxed for shipment. The owner claimed he had never seen any of it. I don't know what happened to him. After the power was cut, the looms took almost a minute to stop. Each row slowed at a different rate until one machine near the center kept hitting by itself. Anna was halfway down the outside ladder when it finally went quiet. He'd been dead for almost 10 years when I first heard my father call my name. It was March of 2007 on a small island off the Washington coast. My family owned a narrow piece of land on the west side, facing a mudflat that vanished at high tide. There was an old cedar house and a dock that had started leaning after a winter storm. My mother wanted to sell. Somebody had to see what needed fixing. I volunteered because nobody else wanted to deal with the ferry. I took the first boat from Anacortes on a Friday morning. A few contractors sat up front with coffee. The sky was flat gray, the same color as the water. My silver Motorola Razr lost service before we reached the island. The property was 20 minutes from the landing, down a wet road and a gravel track lined with alder trees. The Subaru slipped twice in the mud. When I reached the house, the air smelled like salt and wet bark. Gulls were picking at something near the flats. The place looked better than I expected. One gutter had come loose, and the dock was worse than the pictures showed, but the roof was intact. I walked around with a yellow legal pad, writing measurements and taking photos on a little Canon camera. By 9:30, the tide was far out. At low tide, you could walk several hundred yards over packed sand and shallow channels. My father used to take me out there when I was a kid. We dug clams and checked crab pots from a flat-bottomed boat. He knew every channel by sight. He died in 1997 after his fishing boat went down north of the island. The Coast Guard found part of the hull and one boot. They never found him. We buried an empty coffin. I hadn't planned on walking the flats, but I saw something sitting in the fog near the outer channel. At first, it looked like a log. I zoomed in with the camera and realized it was a boat. It was maybe 16 feet long, pointed toward shore, stuck at an angle in the mud. The fog had rolled in fast. 10 minutes earlier, I could see the opposite headland. Now only the bow and part of the stern showed. I figured it had broken loose from a mooring. I checked the tide table taped inside the kitchen cabinet. Low tide had been at 9:18. High tide wasn't until after 3. There was plenty of time. I pulled on rubber boots and took an orange life vest from the shed. It smelled like mildew and gasoline. I also grabbed a coil of rope in case I could drag the boat higher. The first 100 yards were easy. The sand was firm, rippled from the retreating water. Small pools reflected the fog. I could hear the ferry horn behind me. Then I heard my name. It came from the direction of the boat. I stopped. The voice called again, louder, like someone speaking through cupped hands. I assumed the owner was crouched on the far side, hurt or cold. "Hello?" I called. No answer for a few seconds. Then the voice said, "Come on, kid, over here." That was what my father called me, even when I was in college. Not son, usually not my name, just kid. The voice was his. I stood there with the rope over one shoulder, listening to water tick into the little holes left by clams. Somewhere close, a gull made one short cry. There are voices you can forget after 10 years. His wasn't one of them. He had a rough sound from smoking, and he dragged the word "here" out slightly. I had heard him call me across that flat more times than I could count. I decided someone was messing with me. That was easier to believe. My cousin Aaron knew I was going out there. He also knew how much I hated talking about my father. Aaron was not the kind of person who would do something that cruel, but people make bad jokes. I took out my phone. No signal. The boat was about 200 yards away. I started toward it again, slower now. After maybe 20 steps, cold water washed over the toes of my boots. A channel that had been only a few inches deep was near my ankles. Water moved inland in quick lines, curling around ridges in the sand. I looked back. I could still see the dark roof through the fog, though it seemed farther away than it should have. Tides shift. Wind or a storm offshore could change things. My father had warned me about surprise tides. I figured I had misread the chart. Then the voice said, "The line's caught. I need your hands." A shape was standing beside the boat. It was only a dark patch in the fog. I could make out shoulders and one arm raised near the bow. He seemed to be wearing a coat. "Dad?" I said. The word left my mouth before I could stop it. The shape lowered its arm. The water around my boots rose another inch. "That's right," the voice said. "Bring the rope." I backed away. The shape stayed beside the boat. I couldn't see a face, but the voice came straight across the flat. "You left me out here?" it said. My father had never said that when he was alive. The week before he died, we fought because I refused to go fishing with him. I was 19 and tired of spending weekends on his boat. Our last conversation ended with me hanging up. The voice called my name again. I turned and walked toward the house. I did not run. The mud was getting soft, and a bad step could pull a boot off. I kept my eyes on the roof. Water was over my ankles now, moving fast enough to carry eelgrass past me. Behind me, the voice said, "Wrong way, kid." I kept going. "Boat's right here." I said nothing. The first splash came from behind my left shoulder. It sounded like a boot stepping into shallow water. Then another. The steps followed at the same pace as mine, maybe 30 feet back. When I walked faster, they did too. When I stopped, they stopped. I turned once. There was nobody behind me. The boat had vanished into the fog, but I could still hear the steps, water slapping around something I couldn't see. A deeper channel cut across the flat about 50 yards from shore. It had been dry when I walked out. Now the water reached my knees. It was so cold, my legs cramped inside the boots. I held the rope over my head and crossed sideways, feeling for firm sand. Halfway through, my father's voice came from directly behind me. "Don't make me come get you." I dropped the rope. It landed in the water and slid away. I climbed out of the channel, stumbled, and crawled the last few feet onto the gravel above the tide line. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the flat. I stayed on my hands and knees for a moment. My palms were coated with sand. I could taste salt on my lips, and my right boot was full of water. Nothing came out of the fog. I went inside and locked both doors. The back door had a cracked window, and the front lock barely turned, but I closed the curtains anyway. Then I checked the tide table again. High tide, 3:07 p.m. The kitchen clock read 10:14. I called Aaron from the landline. He answered at work in Mount Vernon. I could hear forklifts behind him. When I asked if he'd told anyone I was going to the island, he said only my mother. While we were talking, something bumped against the porch. Once, then again. I put the phone down and looked through the side window. An old red life jacket lay on the bottom step. Water ran from it onto the gravel. It had black straps and a torn patch near the left shoulder. The faded name of my father's fishing boat was written inside the collar and marker. I knew that jacket. My mother had kept it after the Coast Guard returned his gear. It went into the coffin with his clothes. I did not touch it. I stayed in the house until the fog lifted around noon. By then, the entire flat was underwater. Waves pushed against the dock pilings. According to the chart, the water should still have been well below them. The boat was gone. So was the life jacket. There was only a wet outline on the porch step, shaped like someone had set it there carefully, front side up. The man knew which window in Denise's apartment faced the alley before I had told him where she lived. I managed a small antique shop on Wickenden Street in Providence in January 2013. Weekdays were quiet after Christmas. I worked alone and listened to WPRO on a radio under the counter. The front windows leaked cold air, and the brass bell over the door had a thin ring that carried into the back room. Around 3, a man came in carrying a cardboard liquor box. He looked about 40, with a clean coat and a dark knit cap. His cheeks were red from the cold, but there was no snow on his shoulders, even though it had been falling for nearly an hour. He put the box on the counter. "You buy estate stuff?" "Sometimes. Mostly jewelry, some watches, pictures too, if those are worth anything." Pictures usually were not, but I opened the box. The smell reached me first, stale perfume mixed with cigarette smoke. Inside were 3 wristwatches, a pocket watch, several rings in a velvet pouch, 2 rosaries, and a stack of family photographs held by a rubber band. One watch was an old Timex. The rings looked gold-filled, not solid. "Where did you get it?" I asked. "Yard sale." "In January?" He smiled a little. "Indoor sale, apartment cleanout." That was possible. People used yard sale for almost anything involving folding tables and cash. I started checking the rings with a loupe while he looked around. He did not seem interested in the cases. He kept glancing at the front window and the door to my back room. "Did the owner pass away?" "No. Moved out, I think." "You know her?" "No." The answer came fast, but people often got defensive when I asked about ownership. Stolen goods were common, and everyone knew why I required identification. Still, the box looked like the kind of junk a landlord might gather after a tenant left. I removed the rubber band from the photographs. Most were recent drugstore prints. One showed a backyard cookout. Then I saw Denise. She had been a customer for about 2 years. She was around 60 and lived near Fox Point. Every few weeks, she came in looking for small ceramic birds. She never spent much, but she liked to talk. In the photo, she sat at a kitchen table with a birthday cake, wearing the same green wool coat she had worn into my shop. I had not seen her since late summer. For a few seconds, I treated that as normal. Regular customers disappeared for months. Denise had mentioned a sister in Connecticut, so maybe she had gone to stay with her. I held up the photo. Was this the woman from the apartment? The man leaned forward without really looking. Could be. You said you didn't know her. I don't. That's just whose stuff it was. His voice stayed calm, but the friendliness was gone. Where was the sale? Over by the water? Fox Point? He nodded. Which street? After a pause, he said, South Main. Denise had once complained about a bus detour and said she lived off Ives Street. South Main was close enough to sound believable, but it was not where she lived. I went through the rest of the stack. There were several more photos of her. One showed her at India Point Park. Another showed her on at India Point Park. Another showed her on the steps of a narrow gray house. I recognized it because I had driven her home during heavy rain and helped carry a box upstairs. The house stood on a short side street near a laundromat. The man reached for the photos. "Those aren't for sale then?" "I might take the whole box," I said. "I need to know where it came from." He pulled his hand back. My phone was under the counter. It was an older iPhone with a cracked screen, and the camera made a loud shutter sound unless it was muted. I slid it closer while pretending to examine the pocket watch. Then he said, "Second floor. Back bedroom had 2 windows. Kitchen window went out to the alley." I looked up. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the counter. That's where the sale was. I had been inside Denise's apartment for less than a minute, but I remembered the narrow hall and the kitchen at the back. The alley was directly below its window. A random buyer would not know that from standing outside. When was the clean out? November. Who ran it? Landlord. Name? He stared at the box. Ray. Denise's landlord was named Martin. She had complained about him raising the rent. A gust rattled the bell over the door. The radio had moved into a cheerful commercial for replacement windows. I decided not to challenge him. "I can offer 200 for everything," I said. That was far more than the box was worth. His eyes came back to me. "Cash?" "Yes, but I need a receipt and photo ID, store policy." He hesitated, then nodded. I took out a carbon copy purchase form and placed the box on the floor behind the counter. He noticed, but said nothing. He told me his name was Paul and gave an address in Cranston. "Write it here, please." He opened a brown leather wallet and set it on the glass while searching for his license. There were several cards inside, including what looked like an employee badge. He placed the license beside the form and began writing. The form said Paul. The license said Eric. I picked up my phone below the counter and muted it. My hands were so cold, the screen did not respond at first. I wiped my thumb on my jeans and tried again. He was bent over the form, printing the fake address slowly. I raised the phone just above the counter and took 2 pictures of the open wallet and license. His pen stopped. He did not look up right away. "Did you just take a picture?" he asked. I put the phone down. "No." He straightened and looked at it. I could hear the heater clicking behind the wall. "Show me." "It's store business." He moved toward the end of the counter. I stepped back and put one hand on the drawer where we kept the silent alarm button. It called the security company, not the police, and they called the store first. At that moment, the system seemed useless. He saw my hand. "Give me the box." I told him the sale was off. "Then give it back." He did not raise his voice. That was enough. I was alone, and the nearest open business was half a block away. I lifted the box and pushed it across the counter. He caught it before it stopped. The bottom sagged, and the photographs slid sideways. One fell onto the floor behind my side of the counter. We both looked down. It was the photo of Denise at the kitchen table. He picked up his wallet and left with the box. The bell rang once. Through the window, I watched him turn toward Governor Street. He did not run. I locked the door and called the police. The pictures on my phone were blurry, but one showed the address on the license. The officer who came to the shop recognized Denise's name. Her sister had reported her missing in October. There had been no apartment cleanout and no legal sale of her property. Police went to the address that evening. It was an apartment near Atwells Avenue. The man was gone. The place was almost empty. There was a folding chair and a mattress without sheets. Cleaning supplies sat by the sink. They found no jewelry or photographs. In the bedroom, the carpet had recently been removed. The tack strips were still fixed along the walls, and the floor smelled strongly of bleach. A small piece of green wool was caught on a nail inside the closet. The license belonged to someone who had reported it missing months earlier. The employee badge was fake. The name Eric did not lead anywhere. No one told me what happened to Denise. The photograph stayed in an evidence envelope at the station. In it, Denise was smiling at the cake while someone stood behind the camera. On the lower edge, almost hidden by her sleeve, was the date printed by the photo machine. It was taken 3 weeks after her sister reported her missing.